This episode is brought to you by Adaptive. Adaptive is an AI technology that we use for all our cash flow management. If you're in construction, you know how difficult this is. The days of importing all your invoices, cost coding them, asking 10 people in your office where they get coded, is this job approved, is this invoice approved, making notes, all of that is now done through AI. Your invoices get automatically uploaded. After that, all you have to do is cross-check its accuracy per the jobs. This is now saving us hours per job per month because with a click of a button, you can now have the draw process automated, which has been a complete game changer. On top of that, it's going to track your lien waivers as well as your certificates of insurance, making sure that everyone is in compliance before their bills are paid. This is saving us hours and hours per job per month, all with a click of a button. If you want to know more, check out adaptive.build. Additionally, we interviewed Matt Covano on episode 15 of the Curious Builder Podcast. You can find out more about it on our website as well at thecuriousbuilderpodcast.com.
When you're self-performing, your margins are different because you're trying to make money off of each one of your employees versus just a straight 20% on cost plus. We can take on a $2 million remodel and our margin should be different than a straight subcontract. We're also taking on a lot of risk. I found that I like that control. I have 10 guys with a bunch of trucks, so we can go get stuff done immediately.
Welcome to the Curious Builder Podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Today I'm joined with Dagan Koffler from Dagan Design out in California. Welcome, Dagan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. I'm pretty excited. So the last, 30 episodes, everything has basically been in studio. You are officially the first Curious Builder from out state. I think the goal is to do even odd, even to be in-state Minnesota and out-state will be the oddball. So you get to be my first oddball, Dagan.
Sweet. I'll take it.
All right. Well, obviously in Minnesota, I'm guessing most people don't know who you are. Worldwide, you have a massive following. Everyone knows who you are. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your company? You're in Southern California, and just give us a little brief intro on what you do and who you are, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I'm Dagan Koffler, owner of Dagan Design and Construction. We have a couple sister companies too, DDC Landscape, DDC Next, and then DDC & Co. But the construction side is, the biggest following as far as Instagram and social medias and things. It's the bigger of all the companies. We're been transitioning to predominantly design build firm. So we have in-house designers and we have an architect that works with us as our in-house guy. We still take on projects where it's an outside architect and designer, but we've sort of seen that design build, especially with our complications as far as permitting things, is the fastest way to get things done. And it seems to be a desired path that clients want. So over the years, we've sort of developed what streamlines the system, because it's a chaotic system here. And I think we can talk about that at some point, just how difficult it is to build here. So we've just sort of figured out what works best and how to get clients to the finish line fastest, because we had a lot of burnout here.
Yeah. So maybe I'll hijack my own interview right away, because I will start with the end and the beginning. So you have 3 companies, right? So you have
4, really.
Dagan Design. 4. So you've got construction, you've got landscaping, you've got service. What's the 4th one?
It's actually an import company. So we sell furniture from Colombia. So it's an import company.
All right. We got a lot to unpack here. Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, how big is your team? How in the world do you balance 4 separate companies? And then let's go back to the beginning. And why did you keep adding companies?
Yeah, it's all been kind of an evolution. So the first branch was the landscape side, and that was really because we were doing a lot of estates, where there was a fairly substantial landscape project as well as a house side. And over time, I noticed that we're sort of managing that, but it was hard to get a management fee. So we just sort of were doing a lot of free work. And then I always give the example, like the landscaper would say, well, I need all these trenches dug and I'll lay the pipe. So I was like, well, I already did 80% of the job, so why don't I just do the rest of it? So that's sort of like the evolution of how it happened. And then landscape's a little bit more controllable too, because we do them almost 100% in-house. So I don't have to really subcontract anything. So we fluctuate between about 10 up to 15 to 17 guys on that side.
On the landscape side?
On the landscape side. Yeah. So usually when we're running 2 crews that are somewhere between 4 and 6 people each. And we can self-perform pretty much everything. So they're great. So we can take on large projects where it's an acre, 2 acre property with pool and massive amounts of grass and retaining walls and things. And we do a lot of these sort of compact backyards where it's a really cool outdoor kitchen, fire pit, grass area, something for the kids. These little nice little spots.
So how did you, when you started, you started with landscape first?
No, construction. Yeah, so we were always
Okay.
doing the house, and then the landscapers
So
would come in. Yeah, and then we would just do a lot of it.
how
So
many
that's what.
how, how many years were you in construction before you added the landscaping?
Uh, so I started doing some of it on site probably 5 years ago, and then I've had so actually you have to get a second license for landscape here in California. So I went and took the test again, and so I branched off the two companies. So they're two different S corps. So it's actually a full separate company now. So that was 3 years ago, 2 years ago now. It was a full separate company.
And you started what, right? 2012, I think I read on your website. So
Yeah,
basically, you've been in business for about 11 years already.
correct.
Wow,
Yeah,
that went fast, I bet.
real fast. Yeah.
So the landscaping piece, I mean, that makes sense from at least from a cohesion standpoint. When you started your construction company, were you immediately in design build from the very beginning?
Yeah, on a much like smaller scale. So I kind of went through like an evolution. When I was just by myself doing little stuff, I would hand sketch and I would do little bathroom remodels and things like that. And then I kind of went the opposite where I was, mainly working for outside architects and designers. Those are sort of the bigger first projects I got. And then as the world of permitting here got harder and harder and harder, we've sort of seen how difficult it was to have all these parties involved, and no one was really the quarterback on all of it. So we sort of took that initiative and said, well, what's the best way to get the client from like, their initial design thought process, whatever, to this home, to actually getting it approved by cities, which it's a very challenging thing here. So the design in-house also helps our construction side get plans quicker. So we're moving things along quicker versus getting a design package, telling a client, bidding it out, and then it's way too much. And no one's been talking. So we found that we lose a lot of projects, or projects never got built because an architect and designer designed something that wasn't affordable. So we figured that there was a way to sort of help combat that.
When you first started, how big was your team?
Me, I was on my own
Me.
for 5, 6 years. Yeah, I didn't have my
So
first employee
did
till a
did you
little
have an
ways in.
did you have an architecture background then at that time, or how did you even do your own
No, I,
design?
I came from like I've had a couple. I used to design like furniture and build at really small scale, custom furniture, high end stuff. So I would hand sketch. So I was pretty decent at drawing. And on my first handful, I actually would do. I used to draw. I did like I want to say 2 to 4 hand sketched. I actually did the whole permit set by hand. So small little remodels. So I was able to do that at some point in time. And then, as you can't really do that at scale. So I had to figure out new avenues to have people that had CAD experience draw all that. So it was an evolution. I started, design work. So I knew what to do and how to look for it. And if I, taught myself CAD, I probably could still be doing that. But I found that my time was more valuable elsewhere. So I figured out best people to use for those jobs.
So over the last, let's say, well, 11 years of construction anyway, walk me through the maturation of your team building on the construction side. So it was first you, how many years till your second employee? Who was it? What did they do? And I guess walk us through kind of, because what's your current team at right now for just the construction side?
The construction side, it's like six back a house, and I think we have it fluctuates between 10 and 15 in the field. So
Wow, that's a
15, 16.
Yeah. So right now we're 30 between the two companies for those counting.
Correct.
That's a lot. Okay. So, all right. So yeah, walk me through that. How many years? I think what's always interesting to me is scale. I mean, for comparison, I mean, I'm a small custom home builder. We do, 4 high-end homes a year and a handful of remodels, and we're a team of 5. And I don't think I personally have navigated scale very well. So I'm very interested in how you answer this of like, I've heard before, like we're at roughly, let's say 8 to 12 million in revenue, depending if we have a few big homes in there. And I'm sure our costs are less in Minnesota than they are in California. That's probably 2 projects for you. But anyway, the point of it is like, I've kind of heard that between like 12 and 20 million is kind of like a graveyard of scalability.
Yeah.
Did you find that to be true? And how did you navigate that as you built your team over the years for the construction company only?
Yeah. So we kind of pivoted it. We started to do more self performing. So when you're thinking of a revenue, it's not always just like a $3 million project gets you exactly whatever you want to be your margin, 12% margin. when you're doing self-performing, your margins are different because you're trying to make money off of each one of your employees versus just a straight, whatever you're charging 20% on cost plus. So guys that just do, subcontracting 100%, their profit and loss looks a lot different than ours, and our costs look a lot different. So we can take on a $2 million remodel and our margin should be different than a straight subcontract. We're also taking on a lot of risk and we're doing a lot of other things to do that. But I found that I like that control, and I like that, I have 10 guys with a bunch of trucks, so we can go get stuff done immediately, really quickly. Like, you need a house demo tomorrow, I can get two
So
two pieces of
so
equipment out
you
there and a bunch of guys. Yeah.
so you like the flexibility and the risk, if you will, to do what you want when you want. You feel like you can basically manage the economics of your own team and your own, let's say, pipeline of work better than you could by subcontracting everything.
Yeah, and part of it is, it goes back to like sort of our permitting. It's almost impossible to plan because it could be years before we get a permit. So I'm still currently, I think we're with two projects that's been over a year and a half, and they're not started yet. So it's almost impossible. Like, if I could say, sure, like one of them starting in April, one of them starting in June, one of them starting in February, it's impossible here. So we have to be really flexible and just keep guys moving. So we usually have, like, 2 to 4, 2 to 5 bigger projects, full house remodels, additions, and then we take on a bunch of little stuff. Like, we're just constantly moving because when you have that big of staff, you got to have a lot of work. So it's not as finite as some of these custom builders that get. I'd love to say, like, oh, I did three buildings a year and that's it, and I can keep this nice perfect staff, and it sounds great.
So, I mean, that's super interesting. That was one of my questions later. I mean, I actually just literally walked up here. I was doing a bid presentation to a couple. Let it be on record that is the first builder who's ever basically left a contract meeting because he had to go host a podcast. So I was like, guys, we got to wrap this up. You got to sign on the dotted line. I didn't tell him what I was going to do. I just said I had a meeting. But
That's
anyway,
funny.
I guess my question in here is, I get bent out of shape if a permit takes longer than 30 to 45 days in Minnesota. We have really quick turnarounds. Now, if I have to do, like, obviously variance work, that's 3 months. If I have to get, like, our, I don't know, lakes and DNR and things like that, then it takes a couple months. But by and large, our permit process is really fast, and I get frustrated. How on earth are you able to even work with a process that's a year and a half to 2 years for a permit? How do you mentally handle something
It's
like that? Or
It's really challenging, and that's why we have like a burnout phase because clients buy a pretty expensive home and then they want to know what they can do to it, and then it's so limited here what you can and can't do. You're like I always say you have to have like a PhD in, like, San Diego permitting because it's so complicated, and it's so finite what you can and can't do. So most people buy a home and they really have no idea what they can and can't do. They may have come from a different market. We're like, oh yeah, we tore this down and we're able to rebuild in 6 months. Like, you won't even get an architect signed on in 6 months. We're not submitting for 12 months here at the very earliest, and then you probably got a year and a half in permitting after that.
So walk me through, how does that even work? I mean, I assume you're handling some form of a pre-construction retainer or agreement, because I mean, two things here. One is, how do you keep the client interested and not the client themselves burning out? And then two, how are you making sure that your time is being rewarded? Because I mean, you're either putting resources aside or you obviously have some time invested.
Yep. We do a pre-construction now, almost on every project. We won't really go past an initial meeting unless we get a pre-construction,
And
mainly
what does
because it's
that
just
look
such a
like in
time.
terms of, let's say you're doing a $2 or $3 million job. I mean,
Yeah.
you haven't even signed on an architect at this point. You haven't designed it. You haven't bid it. I mean, how are you even knowing what to collect? How does the client
So
even know?
we kind of we're pretty good at numbers because we've done this long enough. So we take initial meeting, try to understand the scope of work, whether it's a large remodel addition, and we can give a $500,000 range. So if we think it's 2.5 to $3 million project, or 2 to 2.5, we'll give them that range, and then we usually do about, roughly, we call it loosely, 1% of what we think the construction cost is. That's our pre-construction. So if it's a 2 million, we're gonna take 20,000, which is going to be, to cover our time to get us through to the permit to get ready for construction. Um,
And then do you just bill hourly against that, or how do you, or that's a flat fee,
no,
or
we
how do
we
you?
used to try to do that. It's just, the whole goal is just to like gain trust, and it's really just to cover our time. So, we'll bill it in two phases. So one up front and then one when whatever the receivable is meant to be, when we have a design package or if we have a permit in hand, whatever that receivable is to get going.
Yeah,
It's really just, it's not a lot of money and the scale of what the project is. It's really just like, our time is valuable. We're here to get you to that finish line. Tell us what, this is a little bit of money to cover our management, and we put the money towards the construction costs when we do it. So it's part of our management fee. So it's not like it's wasted money. It's part of it.
so that's interesting. So correct me if I'm wrong. I was at I was at the Contractor Coalition a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, and I used to design all my design contracts that way. If I was doing a $2 million build, let's just use your analogy, and I would do $20,000 down. And I used to always kind of use it as a selling tool that if you sign on with me, at least for this, it's $20,000 down, and I will give you that 20,000 towards the future build of your house, assuming we get there. I always
Yep.
thought I had to do that. The last year, I have not. I've changed my contracts that is essentially a flat rate, and that is for our time, because if you get the build, you have essentially done that work for free. I mean, you've done that, let's say year and a half, or that's how I look at it now. And the clients, I think, accept that. I think it's, I used to think I had to do that as sort of a loss leader or like a marketing tool, but I
Yeah.
found that as long as I explain it, I don't know, I guess, why not? I mean, would you ever consider keeping that 20,000 as separate? Like that was your pre-construction. It was a year and a half of your time on some of these you should be
Yeah.
paid for, and you sort of are, but why not keep that for yourself? And then the contract, when it happens, is like its whole separate
All
thing.
separate. Yeah, I agree. The main thought process of why we charge it and make it go towards the project is because we obviously want to do the project. I think we've had one pre-construction in the last 3 years that didn't actually do the project with us, which, we got to keep the money that we put in time there. So it wasn't like it was lost. I think I would just feel super cheated if I spent a year of doing this without a fee, and then they went and, were like, I don't really like your contract or something, and then they went to another then I'd feel pretty cheated on that. So I think it just keeps everyone honest. And I think I like your idea. I'd love to keep it as a separate because it's a lot of work.
It
I
is a
mean,
lot of work, and
yeah,
I think it's valuating your own time, because I was like you, and I still have a hard time even articulating, because I still think I think like you. It's only
yeah,
because I've been told like, "Hey, you're doing something for free. You really should charge for your time." Because think about it, at least the way I do pre-construction, because I don't have any of these people in house. Like, I'll bring on an architect, I'll bring on a designer, and my role in the company is I do most of the sales, and I'm kind of the armchair quarterback. I actually don't throw a ball, but I tell the quarterback how to throw the ball sometimes.
sure,
I'm sure my architects love me. So, but anyway, the point is like, I'm kind of getting in their design space, but I mean, it's a ton of time. And obviously if I do a variance or something like that, I'll charge more, if I have to do a bunch of variance proposals. But I mean, it's just a lot of time, and it's me, the owner of the company, doing it
yeah,
versus one of my people. So I feel like that is a good enough story that I can sell that. Like, hey, if you want my time, especially in this planning phase over the first 6 months, like I need to be compensated on some portion of it. If anything, not listening to myself talk, maybe I should charge more, because I'm already thinking about all the time I have
yeah.
invested here.
No, I always think we're undercharging, and again, it's kind of just like establishing the trust. Like, you need us there for that pre-construction, you need
Yeah.
for feasibility, you need, to keep the budget in check. We're the only people that really can do that. So yeah, I think we're pretty valuable, and we're sort of, we have to be there for the project, otherwise it doesn't happen. So yeah, I think you probably could charge more. Again, I think it's just a weighing cost benefit of, if I go too high, does it feel like they would need to pay us this premium just to be there? And the whole goal is obviously to get the project and come to a budget that works for everyone. So, but I do like, because, it is a lot of work, and we end up, the hours we put in usually is not covered by the fee. And it would only really makes sense if we get the project. Like I said, we've only not done one project that we did a
Yeah.
pre-construction on. Um, so, but it probably is. It equates to whatever, a 0.5% margin for the whole project. So it's not nothing.
This episode is brought to you by Alpine Hardwood Flooring. They've been our partner now for over a decade, installing all our wood floors on all our new homes as well as our remodels. And on a personal level, Adam and Anthony Jankola, the owners, are just absolutely amazing people. They've been so supportive of my career, as well as doing anything we need to make sure that our clients are happy. And they work so well with our other vendors and trade partners at not only protecting their product, but also ensuring everyone else's looks great. So if you're looking for a wood floor or for a refinish, I highly recommend Alpine Hardwood Flooring. Find them at alpinehardwoodmn.com or alpinehardwoodmn on Instagram. This episode is brought to you by Pella Northland. For 19.5 years, I've been building homes, and 95% of all of my homes have used Pella windows. I couldn't be happier to call them a partner in our builds and our remodels. Whether you're an architect, a designer, or a remodeler, I'd highly recommend Pella windows. They can fit old homes, new homes, reclaimed, commercial, and really everything in between. Pella is a company that we trust and that we recommend to our clients. Additionally, in management, Peter and Ed have just been absolute fantastic people to work with, as well as mentors to me personally. So when it comes time to look for a window, I'd highly recommend Pella windows. Find more at pellanorthland.com. Also, if you're interested, you can hear episode 1 where I interview Peter and Ed together for a great listen on business and Pella windows. Right. Well, I mean, I think that's one of the benefits of listening to other podcasts and listening to other people. It's like I mean, I've been building for 20 years and I just learned that like 8, 9 months ago. I'm like, oh
I know,
man, wait a minute. So 19, do you ever get bummed out about that stuff? Like
for sure.
I've
Yeah,
talked about this on the podcast recently, and I think there is some huge benefits if you had whether you came from corporate or you came from some other business background. And I'm going to keep sounding like an idiot because I feel like an idiot, but I only learned the difference between markup and margin like a year ago. And
that's funny.
I'm still so angry. I'm like,
Yeah,
wait a minute. So like I've been leaving like 3% markup
for
for
20
20
years.
years.
Don't do
I
the
mean, we're
math.
talking,
Don't do the math.
oh no, that's like millions of dollars.
Yeah,
That's like, honestly, that is,
I know.
I'm still in a grieving, I need therapy process of like, how did nobody explain this to me? So anyway,
Yeah, it's an
uh,
evolution. Because we bill for all of our guys, and it's really hard to like share information. What do guys charge for finished carpenters if you have them in house? What do you charge for design work? What do you charge for, if you have a plumber in house? So it is really challenging. I'm now part of a Builder 20 group, and it's been super helpful because those guys share all of their numbers, and they're from different markets. So it's really interesting to see like, oh, that guy's charging 95 an hour for, oh wow, God, why don't we do that? That
I
sounds good.
mean, I mean, you bring up a good point. For instance, like I've heard we had Chris Anderson on from Month End about 5, 6 episodes, and he's basically a bookkeeper for builders across the country, and he had just kind of said, and actually, oddly enough, his episode was one of the most popular episodes on our show.
Yeah,
Probably 'cause it was he didn't have to talk about specific builders because some builders don't like to talk about margin markup of their own.
yeah,
But I think obviously, you and I don't compete against each other because you're in California, I'm in Minnesota. But like,
yeah,
I guess the point is like his deal is like across the country, he said it kind of ironed out that people should be hitting about 20% gross margin, that maybe 10% overhead and 10% profit. And it was just interesting to hear him talk about that because, like, here locally, I think, and everyone, this is where the numbers on the sworn construction statement get so interesting, right? Like, I might charge a client 13 to, let's say, 15% for a GC. Maybe it's markup, maybe it's margin. It depends on who you are. And then
mhm,
ultimately it's like, then you have your people, in your case, you're self-performing a lot, right? So you might have
yeah,
trimmers and framers and carpenters, and like you might get your all, then the whole goal is, can you get your aggregate back up to that 20% margin,
yeah,
as a goal. But I talked to a builder in Atlanta and he's like 25, 30%. I'm like, dude, what am I doing in Minnesota? I should move to Atlanta.
yeah.
I guess with that framework, what kind of pricing are you seeing in California, um, in terms of markup or margin from your competitors? And is there a difference between new homes and remodels?
Yeah, so, again, our world is kind of different because building a new home is so challenging here that they're far and few between. So most people do these. You tear 49% of the house down because it makes the permitting faster. So if you leave 51% of the existing wall line, it's about a year off of the permit time and probably a savings of 50 to 100 grand. So there's all these
Just
avenues
in
that people
permit costs?
just in permit cost.
Oh my word.
So there's all these avenues that people try to do in order to not do that because we have Coastal Commission, which is another California agency, and then you have to go through like design review boards if each city has them, and then you go to your municipality just for like standard building stuff. So it's challenging. So uh, we it's really hard to just keep moving on that platform. So a lot of remodels happen, and remodels are obviously considerably more challenging to price, which is sort of the evolution of how we went to cost plus. We used to do lump sum or fixed fee for the project, and it just basically became impossible. They're just too complex now. We ended up just eating huge portions of the job because it's impossible to to cost out what things are really going to happen. But in general, you get guys who just do a straight markup, whatever between 20 and 30%, and they take their fee out of that. Some people break it out. We break it out where it's 20% markup and then 15% overhead, with the goal of being somewhere in that, 12% range, 12 to 15% margin. We end up
So
eating some
hang on,
more.
just to make sure I understand that
Yeah,
correctly. So you're saying at the end of all of that, you're trying to net a 12% margin, but I'm
yeah.
confused. If you're at 35% markup, it should be far higher margin, or you're not factoring your
Costs,
overhead. Okay.
overheads included in that. Yeah, our costs are so high. So after you settle all those debts, that's sort of what's left.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So that
Yeah,
ends up being a little bit closer, actually.
yeah.
Interesting.
I think it just the margin's the same, but our costs, we probably have more overhead. And just as a company setup, we have more overhead. So if you were just a paper contractor, whatever you can call it, and you were charging that, your
Ah,
overhead is so much less. We have
that's true.
machines and
Okay,
we
yeah.
have all the above.
I got you. I got you. Okay, now it's making a little bit more sense.
Yeah,
We'd have to get into P&L, which we won't do to really
yeah,
understand it, but okay. Okay, so, I guess we're already down the permit road, so we'll in construction, I wanna get back to your other companies, at some point, but let's go back to permitting. Why is it, for those that aren't from California like me, why in the world are permits so long? And is it only because you're in the San Francisco area because you're by the ocean, or is all of California that way?
it's most of California. So we're in North County, San Diego, which is our specific. We're in Encinitas, but all of these coastal cities, if you're within a certain distance of the ocean, you get coastal commission requirements, which is a California state agency. So before you can even submit to your local, you have to get approval from the state. It's basically because you're in proximity to the ocean. So that's why tearing down a house is that approval takes a year from coastal commission.
And what is it exactly specifically that they're looking for, or what do
Like
these permits even
environmental
look like?
studies.
Yeah.
A lot of these cities have height restrictions, view ordinances. You have to do story polls. There's complaint driven from neighbors, so it just takes a long time. And then we have probably the most uh, probably the strictest structural codes in the country because of earthquake and fire. So we have that to deal with. So our structural engineers, they take probably 3 times as long as a standard place rest of the country. Our hardware packages are 4 times the size of what yours are probably. Moment
It's so
frames,
funny because I know,
sheeting.
and I had mentioned, we were in Huntington Beach for the Contractor Coalition, which isn't too far away from you,
Yeah.
about a year ago, and I got to meet, I'm blanking on his first name, Patterson Custom Homes. What's his first name?
Oh yeah.
You've referenced him
Uh,
before. Um,
yeah.
Anyway,
It'll come to me. I know he's in
but
Newport.
I went yeah, and so I went surfing with him, and it was really interesting, but one of his guys came with us, and they were talking that I always thought that labor was the hardest part, not the permitting, because, for him anyway, he had mentioned how a lot of his guys have to drive several hours just to get to work
Yep.
because, they were, in such a high, good luck living anywhere near where you're building homes.
Correct.
Do you have issues with labor? I know a lot of your labor obviously is self-performing. You have them on your staff, but are people able to live nearby where you work?
No, and it's a big problem because a lot of these guys do drive about an hour. Yeah, funny enough, San Diego just some like USA Today or something. USA San Diego is now the most unaffordable city in the United States, so that didn't
Oh,
help.
oh,
Cost of living, yeah,
really?
um,
It's more expensive than San Francisco or New York?
yeah, yeah. It's the highest cost of living now in the country.
Wow.
Yeah, so rentals are wildly high. Real estate's pretty expensive. So we run into this all the time. Is each guy wants a raise every week, and then they're also living far away. We have the highest gas prices in the country. We're almost $6 a gallon right now.
No
Um,
way.
yeah, it's 5.79, I think it is right now.
We're at like three
Um,
and a half.
right. So we have the high, like we're double
Wow.
the rest of the country. So just those costs they just play. That's why when we talk about overhead. I have 4 trucks that consume 10 miles a gallon. So you just do the gas costs in a couple weeks, and
It's funny though, like, I mean, this is beyond my expertise. We need an economics professor to solve this one. But like, at what point, like, how is there any relief? Because your guys are further and further away. The costs keep going up. The cost of living is only going to increase. And I know inflation has a part of this as well. But like,
yeah,
especially in a high demand area like San Diego, I mean, we talk about affordable. building here in Minnesota, and that's for another time locally. But even so, because we're 90,000 units short of what our population needs in the Minneapolis St. Paul area,
We're probably
and we
5 times that.
oh
And
really?
and we can't get permits. You can get permits in 30 days. It takes us, 2 years. So that number for us is going to just exponentially get larger and larger because we can't build fast enough. So it's a huge problem. I mean, I always say like it's not a mystery why we have low income. We can't get permits, and the cost of building is way too high. So if you sped up one of those two, that would be helpful. Maybe the permits. Let's speed up the permits. We can build faster. We'll get more guys in the trades. We might be able to control costs on the labor side.
I'm I mean, I'm not a big government guy, but like, who would be responsible for trying to change some of that stuff? Is
State
that
law, and it's happening
that's
fast.
state law?
It's happening really fast. So they've been changing what has taken 40 years. They've been reversing that like one every year for the last like 5 years because it's gotten so bad. Uh, but you can't really do it on a blanket because there's too much political, jargon that happens in between there. But so they figure out the best avenue that has the least, conflict. So ADUs, you've probably heard, accessory dwelling
Yeah.
units. That's been the
Hmm.
big push because you can kind of approve those anywhere, and they can just sort of be plopped in a backyard. Gets a separate address. It's an easy rental. They're easy to build for homeowners. And then the most recent was literally like weeks ago is they just passed a state law that you can now sell that ADU. It used to only be part of one property because you couldn't subdivide. Subdividing here is a whole nother issue, like variance or planning. Subdivision, if it's capable, is a year and a half project and $100,000, no problem, easy. So it never makes sense to subdivide unless the home's worth millions because it's just too much cost. So these things are happening very quickly because we've gotten into more or less a crisis on building and affordable homes.
Wow. We could do a whole segment just on this. I want to get
Yeah,
back to the original question, which we've strayed from, which is totally my fault. Like most of these things, I get too interested in your answers, then I
it's all
stray
good.
from
Yeah,
my
it's
core
all
one.
relative stuff.
So
Yeah.
we've got construction. We figure, you've got 15 people. We've talked about landscaping. You got 15 people. Let's talk about your service department, which is
Yeah.
was it Dagan Next, or
DDC
what's
next.
the name?
Yeah.
DDC
DDC
Next.
next. Yeah.
Yeah. When did that come about? And tell us a little bit about how that works.
It's been probably 4 years, and we don't do it. It's not a ton, but it was really kind of brought on by a client. So a client that they moved here for a job, and they're actually from New York originally, and moved around a little bit. But they were going to be moving back to New York, and they wanted to keep this home as a second home. And he kind of asked, "Would you like watch our house?" And we did a little research and sort of understood. They want someone to go. We go there once a week, so it's kind of like a monitoring, actual monitoring of a home. Um, so we have a guy who goes there once a week. Really, they check for like angle stops, any leaks, water heater, moisture. And it's also like security, any break-ins, things like that. And then we also do the landscape maintenance for them. Um, and this homeowner loves to keep his house in perfect condition. So every couple months it's like, hey, can we freshen up this? Can we it's all wood windows. Can we refresh all the windows? Can we add this? And it's every year we do probably between 4 to 6 projects, small projects for them. So it's been kind of fun though. So it's a mixed bag. It's like kind of concierge service. It's security monitoring of a home, and landscape. And so we just picked up another house, a large home in Ranch Santa Fe. It's another big area close to us that has sort of estate style homes. But we've started with homes we finished too. We try to get them on track to do that as well. So once we install appliances, we take all the serial numbers. So if you ever have a warranty, we have all the serial numbers because they always require that. So we're kind of prepared, and then we give them a list of the things that should be done and need to be done in order to like maintain warranty with us. So if you're not, cleaning out your sub-zeros once a year, if you're not replacing your return registers, filters, if you're not doing any of these things that we're telling you need to do to keep in proper maintenance, then, warranties can be voided. So we just want to sign them up to say, okay, you guys just handle all of that. That's great. That's kind of the idea.
So it's interesting. I'm probably ask you a lot of questions on this one because I've been thinking about this for a while of whether I want to do this or not, because I still think you have to manage it. So just because I do like the idea from a business owner, like you have a reoccurring revenue stream because once you obviously finish a project now as a service, you're going weekly. So you've got 52 touches a year. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Walk me through. So you started because this one client of yours wanted to do it. How many total clients do you have now? How big is your team that services it? And walk me through some of just the logistics of how how is like how you obviously like creating businesses and you seem to be
Yeah.
good at it because you keep adding more. Either that or you're creating a Ponzi scheme. So
This is small. It's only 3, and so it's really one guy manages the walkthroughs, but then we use our construction side staff for all the fixes. So, like my painter, he's my main painter. He just got subbed out to go do all these windows for a house. So he sanded down, refinished. I think it was like 10 different windows. So that's a small project that we manage, and it's just like a baby project on the construction side, but it's funneled through the DDC Next. So they're sort of
interesting. So you
yeah.
have basically you would have, if I'm guessing here, you have one employee for DDC Next. He
Mhm.
manages or she manages the entire job scheduling, has probably a truck, probably kind of pretty handy. I'd love to know what that background of that person is.
It's
And then
it's actually
essentially,
pretty minimal because his really there is just for eyes on the project. So he does. We have sort of a checklist of the walkthrough. Most of it's water. So he rubs his hand on every angle stop just to see if there's any leaking. He walks the ride to see if there's any security things. He checks gutters. It's a basic checklist just to see if there's anything that needs looking after or maintenance. And then like this family keeps cars, so we actually start their cars every 2 weeks, let them run so batteries don't die. There's a bit of a concierge service. People have lots of deliveries, so they don't get kept outside. And then we're just sort of on call a lot. So when they're here for the holidays, like boxes, you need 40 boxes removed immediately. So we send a truck and we go pick it up. Just stuff
that's
like that. So,
amazing. Do
um,
they do you charge them hourly? How do you bill for this kind of thing?
yeah, it's hourly. Yeah, so
Yeah.
we just have a set hours for each, whatever the person that's going there. So we have a set hour for the person who just monitors the house. On a standard walkthrough, it's about a 3-hour round trip, so they get charged for 3 hours. The second time when they do cars, it might be half hour, 45 minutes longer, and then we just bill on actuals on every little bit. Most of it, I'd say it's all like trust. So we're not creating a proposal for them to go clean gutters. It's like gutters need to be clean. Here's the invoice. Here's our time and markup for it. And it's all
Yep.
about trust. So we
Yep.
want to get it done next week. Can you get it done next week? Sounds great. That's sort of how it works.
I mean, you get it done. I mean, I love it. Obviously, you have to have people willing to pay for it, but if you've built that trust and you're not taking on, it's not like you have 100 of these. You have a handful of them, so you treat them really
Correct.
hot, really well. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
And we don't want
Um,
a lot. We don't want it to be, like an Airbnb management thing. It's meant for second homes or customers who really want to just have their home dialed in and they want to pay for, basically to have you on a phone call away.
and I would imagine that it also is an incredible sales tool. I mean, I know if I had that at my disposal, I mean, I could sell that really
Yeah.
well because I mean,
A
who
lot of it is
wouldn't want that?
they don't want us to go away. You've probably seen that, like, when they have you for a year or 2 and you can answer all these questions and their home better than they do, they don't really want you to leave because if they ever have a question, they wanna be, like, on good terms where they could say, like, "Hey, Mark, how do I do this at my house?
I
I
would
don't."
I would
Yeah,
and I would agree with you. 99% of the clients I've worked with, I had one client where it's like, I'm not sure I would extend that offer to that one client because 'cause I'm like,
yeah,
I don't want to go back there again.
correct. And it
Um,
happens, and you gotta pick and
yeah,
choose, you
yeah.
pick and choose who you work with for long term for sure. Yeah.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
What, if you can, like, what any idea, like, what would your overhead be on DDC Next? Because it seems like you're running that pretty light because 'cause you're sort of leveraging your other, landscaping. I assume you're building your landscape company for that, and
Yep,
for construction services, you're building that through construction. So what
correct.
would your actual overhead be?
Very
Because
little, just it's just the guy's
yeah,
labor for the most part, and
okay,
some materials. Occasionally, it's a subcontracted out, so, like, my HVAC does all the yearly fluids for the AC compressors, and he does all the filters. We do that twice a year. So it's just a subcontract. It's just like, it's like any other subcontractor work. But everything else is pretty much in-house, so it's all labor rates, so very little overhead. The guy who does all the monitoring, he uses his own car, so it's a gas mileage, but very little overhead in general.
okay. Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, let's move on. Well, scalability. I mean, do you plan on scaling that, or you just kind of like what it's doing right now, or what do you see the future for this DDC next?
It's a growing thing because we've had like positive and negative. We had a couple clients who, like I said, that's why we kind of make it a blanket where it's all about trust. So we're not gonna, if you say, hey, I want to get my gate motor fixed, we're not gonna meet three people and get you bids and then only charge you for the 1 hour of when we're there to do it. It's you want it done, we're gonna get the right guy to do it, and we'll bill you for it. When they understand that that's the process and they're okay with that, then it's a pretty positive experience for everyone because we have an opportunity to make money. We get stuff done for them, peace of mind, and they know that we're a phone call away for anything. Honestly, I just had a call before I got on this with a client who's thinking of being out of state 6 months a year. And their biggest worry is like, if a toilet floods, like if we call you, are you able to get someone out there immediately? And like the answer is yes. And that's the peace of mind that everyone wants is like, I don't know anyone else that knows how to turn water shutoffs off and where the water main is. Like, if you're the person, can we just trust that you can get someone over there to turn it off? And like, yes,
So
that's it.
I'm gonna turn you into my business consultant.
Yeah.
So if I was gonna start this, I would need what, a Sprinter van full of tools, one guy. I'd pay him what, 60 to 100,000, and I would. But first, I'm thinking about pre-selling it, so I would probably poll my last 50 clients and just say, "Hey, would you guys spend, or would you guys commit to 5,000 a year, 10,000 a year? This is the list of services I would pre-sell, and then I would go hire someone." I mean, how would you, if you were to do this over again, how would you structure this, or what advice would you give to somebody like myself, like who I would like to service my clients for two reasons. One, I want them to be happy. Two, I love the idea that I can service them if there was ever an issue. Plus, I think it's also an opportunity. The door is always open. If you're constantly in touch with your client, you
Hmm.
know that they're going to sell their house, maybe build a new one. Maybe they're going to finish their basement, and you haven't seen them in 6, 7 years. Did you fall off their top of mind awareness? You're also going to be more likely to be referred to people. But then lastly, at some point, if I was, trying to be able to, I know it's hard to sell a construction company because we have such a low barrier of entry. And it's like,
Sure.
if Dagan leaves or if Mark leaves, do you really have a company? And that's something I'm trying to actively fix. It's going to take a while to do that. But
That was part
if
of
you
my
have,
thought process too, for sure, is the
it was. So
sellability.
if you
Yeah.
have, yeah. So if you have a service department that, let's say, bringing in 100 grand a year for just an
It's
easy
steady
number.
income. It's not perspective
Yeah.
or it's not future. It's steady.
So am I
Yeah.
thinking about that the right way? I mean, is that what advice
So
what
I
advice
went
would
kind
you
of the
give me?
opposite since I had all the in-house staff. I didn't go at it as I needed to hire a single person for this because I think having that workflow is challenging. So, you got to keep that guy busy 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. And without small fixes, and maybe that comes, where you can charge for, refinishing this or refinishing that. But that person's got to be very skilled. So it's a challenge. And I found that trying to find that guy was too hard. So I just used people that worked within the umbrella that I had already. And then I sort of branch out. So the person that does the monitoring is not that handy, but he knows what to look for. And then we can just figure out what guy within the company is the best fit for that. I have a lot of guys that are, great carpenters, skilled, can kind of do whatever. So, once we know what the problem is, we can get one of our teammates out there pretty quickly.
Right.
So I didn't go at it as like I'm creating like a job for one person. And then the fixed fee is also challenging because you really have to define what that maintenance scope of work is and then what those costs are to you. And then does it make sense? Like 5,000 sounds like a lot, but like, you do ACs, you do filters, you do gutter cleaning, you do window maintenance, you do solar panel cleaning, you do X, Y, and Z. And you're like, oh my God, 5,000 is not really that much, So that's kind of how we
Right.
did it more like
And,
on
hey, in
demand.
California, that's just your gas bill for the year.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So we do it more like on demand. There's a minimum service just to monitor. And then we just sort of have our hourly. And then again, it's kind of like on trust because, you know, most of your homes might be new construction. A lot of ours are remodels. So there's parts of the home that are still old. We probably did most of the work there, but there might be things that come up. So it's kind of challenging to do it as a fix. And I think Patterson does it as a fixed thing, but I think his is just like, he just wants a certain amount of revenue that covers everything, and then whatever after that is kind of gravy. Um, and that's a way of doing it too. Just like that, just keeps you in the door. If that's your mind frame, then like if you don't really want to make money off of it, or if it's just like if it does make it to this point, that's great. But I felt that it was a little bit easier to do it more of a like on demand type of situation.
From the bookkeeping standpoint, because obviously, do you have a full? I mean, I assume you have for sure a full time bookkeeper, maybe two. I mean, do you have in house accounting, or how are you handling all this bookkeeping? Because you also have to track 30 people's time cards and all that.
So we have an outside accountant, but then office manager does all the bookkeeping. So all the time cards, insurance, all the above. Yeah, because we
And
also have
are you guys managing that all digitally through like Builder Trend or some sort of platform?
we use CoConstruct, QuickBooks, CoConstruct. So yeah, we have a few different platforms that we use. And on the design side, we have AutoCAD and Drawboard. But CoConstruct and QuickBooks are our main sort of business.
So CoConstruct got bought out by Builder Trend. Are they still servicing it, or what's the future of CoConstruct?
Yeah, it's been an interesting ride with them because I've been with them for like 6 years, I think. So before they were bought out, and I made a conscious choice to go with them because I like some of the features better than Builder Trend at the time. um, there was a big push to sort of kick us out of CoConstruct, and then there was a lot of pushback, I think, from CoConstruct users. So they sort of just told us that it's going to be alive forever, but they're not really going to put any money into it. So I think it's down to like one customer service rep. But it seems like they're actually in the last 6 months, I think they're realizing that the CoConstruct users are pretty loyal and they don't want to move. And I think they're going to be real mad if they do. And I think there's quite a few. I think a guy at my Builder 20 said that I think there's at least 5,000 of us. So it's not a small number. And I think all 5,000 don't want to move. So
Right.
um, we don't use it like heavily, but we do use as the estimating software, to dos, job logs, things like that. We use quite a bit of it, but we prefer the features considerably more um, than Builder Trend right now.
You had mentioned moving on to your next conquest of companies. Was it your import business?
Yeah.
How in the world did that come about?
uh, so when we picked up the design side of our business quite a bit in the last couple of years. So we're probably designing. So we do a mixed bag. So we have two in-house designers, and then we have an architect who's an outside firm, but he works as our in-house guy. Um, so again, most of the challenges here, permitting wise, is a lot of people choose to just do an internal remodel versus going through a city permitting set. So we can do the interior design very quickly and get started on a construction project faster than if you did that through city permitting. So that's the route that most people choose to do. And even when I get involved when people are in escrow a lot, so they always ask like, "Oh, well, this home's great, but we would want 800 square feet more." And I always say, like, find a building, any house, any condition that has the footprint that you are okay with, square footage that you don't need to add, because we can do a lot with that much faster. If you want to add 800 square feet, this is a 3-year project. If you can find a house that has that extra 800 square feet, we can do an internal remodel and, swap window siding, whatever, and we could be in and out of here in, 14 months. So, that's the advice usually I give as far as giving them the options of what this is going to look like.
Interesting. One of the questions that I had for you was, you have all these businesses. What's the next business? Because if you've gone to 2 to 3 to 4, there's got to be some other things cooking around in that little Dagan brain of yours. What are some other ones that are kind of itching to see daylight?
I keep saying, building is cyclical and it's finicky and it can go up and down. And like you said, it's a hard building, or it's a hard business to sell. And if you don't have a son or daughter that wants to take it over, or it's a challenging thing to navigate. And so we'll work for 30 years and then we just got to leave. If no
I
one
wish
wants it.
somebody had. Don't you wish somebody had told you that before you started? Like no one. When I was 23 and I started, it's like I wouldn't have named it after myself. Looks like you took the same bad advice I did.
Yep.
And then second is like nobody told you like, hey, if you're gonna create a career, you might as well put 30 years into a business that you can sell. And now I'm just like, oh man, the
Yeah.
idea that you will have work for 30 years and that asset isn't worth anything seems also almost as disappointing as not using margin for your entire career.
Correct. Yeah. Yes, it is challenging. I think it's changing a little bit. I think construction companies that have a good reputation are becoming valuable to some extent, just because there's not that many. The sort of trade shortage that we have. All those general contractors that were good old timers, or time we're ready to be gone, they're all gone. They're long gone. Um, and I don't know what the next group of young builders look like, or tradespeople. So if you can walk in, even a private equity firm, if they could find a go-to guy and say, we'll support this guy, you take over from here, there is potential value there. Um, if you got a workload for 2 years that can, garner $6, $8, $10 million, those are locked in contracts, and you have these systems set up. I think that's a big one. Is most builders, the old timers, everything's on a piece of paper, and you know, I need here's an invoice for 30 grand. I need it tomorrow. It's like those days are gone. You have to be much more systematic than those days. So I think if you can prove those systems have value, and that this is not like plug and play, so to speak, but if you can bring in a builder that can run it from here, these systems are in place that people, we have some standard operating procedures that someone could look at this, figure out what are the steps I need to take to get to the permit set. Oh, here's this like nice list of things that I got to get done. So, you know, we're not perfect. We're, every day, every meeting's a new SOP, but it's a work in progress. But we're trying to make steps to get to that point where at least we can bring a new person in, we can train them, and we have, materials and solutions for them to follow.
How do you handle hiring? I mean, we just went through it where we hired a new office manager, and we looked for a project manager. And as you're trying to figure out, like, do you train somebody up? Do you hire someone who's skilled, but maybe you have to pay them more than you'd like? I guess walk me through how have you guys navigated employment? I mean, you employ a lot of people. I mean, at least 30 people. I guess what are some secret sauce suggestions that you have for those that own a business?
Yeah. Field guys have been kind of like just serendipitous. They, guys, the ones that have been with me for a long time either started with another company and I knew them from somewhere else. And then they called me and said, hey, I left, but I loved working for you. What do you think? And then I kind of bring them on. So like my Finnish carpenter, been with me for 5+ years now. He's amazing. And he was from an old demo firm. The guy didn't see the value in him, and I was like, "That guy's smart. He's good. Like, what are you doing?" like, and he called me a few weeks later and was like, "Yeah, I left over there. You got any work for me?" And I was like, "Sure, get over here." Absolutely. And then, it's 5 years later. So, um, a lot of them come by friends, so they all have friends and relatives that either have a trade. Um, I haven't really hired too many like very experienced people, higher dollar, experience. We just went through to hire a super, and we had an option for a commercial guy, and a lot of my builder 20 people were like, stay away. you know, they don't know how to transition into residential. So there's all these like avenues that are challenging. Um, and the price point on everyone is challenging too, because you really need to crank out revenue in order to support a staff like this. So um, it gets hard, but most of the field guys have come through my top guys who I say, hey, do you know anyone that's good finish carpenter? And they'll be like, oh yeah, I got this guy who worked for me. Let's see if we can get him. And then, that's usually sort of how it works. Landscape guys, I have a family basically I hire, the Lopez family. I think there's 6 of them now that work for me. And 3 or 4 of them are like amazing masons and can basically build anything on the landscape side. And they got 12 cousins and uncles and brothers that all, if we need the staff up, I, usually have pretty available guys. So that's sort of how that flow works.
Well, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, ultimately, what you're talking about is sustainable because you're talking about tapping into a community and you're talking
Yeah.
about promoting people and hiring people within your own team. So they're obviously you're doing something right at the head of the ship because people A want to work for you and B they're recommending their friends and family. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing I have written down here because it was actually I've shared it a number of times on the podcast, but Ed Engelbrecht, the owner of Pella Windows here in Minnesota, he had said it on his episode. He had just said that culture trumps strategy. And it's been one thing I've noticed with many of the companies that I've interviewed that the successful ones have a very, obviously just a great culture. And sometimes people can define it and tell you what it is. Sometimes they can't. I sometimes have a hard time. If someone was to tell me what's my company culture, I'm not sure I could tell you, articulate it in a way. It's almost like a feeling. But I guess I'll turn the question on you. How would you define, the culture of your environment? Because clearly it's working.
Yeah, I think it is really hard to like define in a few words, but I think making guys feel appreciated. I also last podcast, I used to wear bags, so I'm also there's a connection there too. I'm not a guy that was always computer driven. I still like be on site, and if I can get to every site, I can get a lot done quickly because there's just sort of a easy understanding. Like, hey, this is how this has to be. Tack it here, tack it here. This is how you do it. I can show them real quick. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, I got it, boss. Thanks, man. I'm out of here. So there's that connection that's nice. And then team morale, like we constantly try to figure out how we can keep morale high. So we went bowling a few weeks ago and it was just really fun. We took everyone bowling and beer and pizza. So anytime we can just like keep morale high and sometimes just like chat offline sometimes is nice. But I think for the most part, just being appreciated and understood and like feel like you're part of the team. You're not just like a outcast or not doing something for a greater good. But it's not like there's no couple words that can kind of describe it. I think it's just like it's respect, common respect. I speak Spanish. Like 90% of my staff speak only Spanish. So there's that kind of camaraderie. Like, oh, the boss speaks Spanish. That's cool.
I would have to imagine that's pretty common in San Diego, meaning that people know it's not.
No, I mean, out of the 20 something in the field, only like two or three are bilingual.
Wow, that's actually quite surprising. Is that
Yeah.
because are they native San Diegans, or are they people transplanting there, or why would that be? That seems
Yeah, well,
highly unusual.
Guatemalans, a lot of Guatemalans and Mexicans for the most part are two countries that they come from. Um, but some are second generation and like limited English. It just depends. Every
No,
sort of
that
setup's
wasn't
different.
my question.
Oh,
Sorry, I meant it inverse. Like, as I'm a little surprised that the population that's already there, not let's say the workforce in this situation, wouldn't that they would be bilingual. So you're saying that your workers may not be bilingual, but people like yourself. I can't imagine you owning a company, especially in Southern California, and not either investing the time or I guess I'm curious
it's
how
very
many other
rare.
builders.
Yeah,
So
it's very rare.
your other builders would not speak Spanish.
I think I'm the only guy I know that does. Yeah, I don't.
That's shocking.
Yeah,
That blows me away.
yeah. I think I'm
I
the
have
only guy I know. Yeah,
very, very limited Spanish. I took it in college just a little bit, but I always try to, hace frio or like
yeah.
hace calor. I try to interact with my guys to the best of my very limited ability, but here it's not nearly as prevalent as it would be down
No,
there.
our like the vast majority of our construction workforce here is Hispanic. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
that's
yeah, big
yeah,
big
wow.
part of our construction population is Hispanic. So
Yeah.
it's a big part of the culture too. All these guys
Yeah.
come from backgrounds of whatever they were doing.
Yep.
That's why I said it's pretty easy to find a cousin or brother because someone's got skills somewhere in whatever they were doing.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but no, it
That's
is
amazing.
pretty rare. You'll get a second generation, Mexican American who will speak bilingual, but those companies are far and few between to, the white guy or gal who doesn't speak Spanish.
Well, and I just wanna make sure because the audience, I wanna make sure the audience isn't clear. So, and maybe I'm the one who's not understanding this. So, like, I get that a lot of the transplants aren't bilingual. I'm asking basically the business owners, the other Dagans, the Bobs, they're just to be very clear, they don't speak Spanish very
They
well.
do not. No, I would say the
Okay, that
vast
okay.
majority do not.
'Cause I don't blame the people moving from Venezuela and Guatemala not speaking English. I
Correct.
do sort of blame the people that live in San Diego not taking the time to learn Spanish. Because 'cause I'm like, "Man, if I lived there, I would make sure all my kids spoke Spanish. Because like, I just like, man, how do you converse with your neighbor?"
Yep. No, it's
Wow.
it's an interesting deal, and I saw the advantage of it,
Yeah, good
being
for
able to
you.
be on site and doing that. So
Mhm.
it's interesting. Yeah,
Did you learn by traveling? Did you just learn in school? Did you learn by doing it? Or how did
traveling
you
mainly. Yeah, after college, I spent a year in Latin America,
Oh, okay.
and yeah, I did a ginormous loop around South America, starting in Venezuela, and learn on the road, so to speak.
Sure, sure. I spent some time in Argentina, but not enough to remember enough Spanish to make it count. But I do
Yeah,
love South America. How
yeah,
speaking of South America, I'm thinking of some Malbec wine because my cousin lived down in Mendoza, and I was
yeah,
reading somewhere along the line that used to be a sommelier, and that is a pretty rare skill set. Venn diagram builder and sommelier.
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that, and
Couple
have you
different
been
worlds
able?
there.
Have you I mean, other than I'm sure you're an amazing gift giver around Christmas, you can give your clients some ridiculously
Yeah.
cool wine. I guess tell us a little bit about how that came about, but then just more briefly how it's related now to building. Are you able to use any of those skills, whether it's management or details or,
Mhm.
how do you think it actually helps you at all being a better designer, a better
Yeah, I
builder?
think all the experience helps. I mean, most of it's just the people skills. But the reason I got into it, I went to Sonoma State, which is up near Napa, Sonoma. That's where I went to college, and so I think my sophomore year in college, I started working at a winery. Um, so I learned a lot about winery, and I was like head of a tasting room by my senior year. So I would do like all the private, wine classes and stuff. Like I was just barely able to drink, but I was like teaching classes about.
That's pretty funny. You had your own vineyard, but you couldn't drink.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, my only exposure to a sommelier, other than it, having a nice glass of wine every once in a while with dinner, but like, I remember seeing the movie. It was on Netflix. Was it
Yeah.
Sommelier? And like, I mean, is it as hard as they make it seem to be? Like people study for crazy amounts of time. Like, uh, are you, let's
Yeah.
say, and once you are a sommelier, like a registered sommelier, are you that for life, or do you have to like keep up on it, or how does that
So
accreditation
that
work?
that movie is based off the Master Sommeliers, which is kind of like it's like an educational level. There's a various stages. So I was part of the WSET Wine Spirit Institute Trust. That's the Master Sommelier class, the one that's based off of. But you can kind of get like various levels of education on it. So I think I ended at the advanced level, and the next one is I think it's called the I can't remember the next one. But that's the one that the movie's based off of. That's where you have to take like 6 blind tasting, and you have to know the origin, the grape, the everything.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. I thought once you're a sommelier, like, that was like, once you're, let's say, a doctor, like, you're a doctor, like, you've passed medicals, you've done residency, it's not quite the same, there's different
No,
grades
it's
for the
more just like a status thing for the
okay,
sommelier because most of those guys aren't like working somms. They don't work at a restaurant. They're not managing wine lists or anything. Most of the core industry of sommeliers are managing some sort of restaurant list, or they're a beverage director for a group or whatever. Um,
okay,
but yeah, so when I moved to New York, I worked at an auction house. That was why I moved to New York. I worked at Zacky's Walk. It's in Scarsdale, or White Plains, up in northern New York,
yeah.
and it's the largest wine auction house in the world. Um, so part of interesting part of it is that we got to catalog private sellers. So I got to go into some of the, like, the largest homes on like the Eastern Board. Like we cataloged the seller in Naples, Florida. It was like this, 3-story mansion on the water, and he had like 3 generator setups for his 2 wine cellars. This was
3
like,
generators, oh my
yes.
wo
So he had repeated 3 times just in case he failed twice. And this was, it was like a $2 million, seller. So I got to see some radical, you know, these sellers are pretty
wow.
crazy. We saw a few in Greenwich, Connecticut that were pretty amazing. Natural sellers where, they actually were so far underneath where it kept like perfect 59, 61 degrees year round. Um, so, I got to see some pretty interesting architecture. I wasn't like in the mind frame, I'm going to be a builder, but I think all that played into my goal and wanting to go that route. Um, but I think more than anything is the people skills, is like learning to deal with people. If you don't like a certain wine, it's the same thing as like design and homes. Like, well, let me gear you back here, because here's things
That's
that you might like.
that's so funny you say that. I feel like that's been a reoccurring theme on the Curious Builder podcast for like the last month. We just had Jordan Diorio on not too long ago, and she's a fractional CEO, and she was just talking about how she felt like everyone should have some level of experience in the service industry because of how incredible a training tool it is for service skills. And I had heard a story that I've repeated at this point. Who knows if it's even true anymore because it keeps getting bigger and bigger, the tale. But like basically, it was a plumber in Florida that needed people with better people skills, and he couldn't train people to do it. So he went and hired a bunch of, essentially servers or maitre d's, and then he
Yeah.
trained them to learn how to plumb, and he just slayed it. And I just
Yeah.
love that. Whether it's true or not, I guess I need to fact check that, but I guess it
For
doesn't
sure.
matter because I believe
Yeah.
that's true. And I actually never had any service industry. There's a part of me, honestly, that wants to go back and just
Yeah.
work like one night a week at a restaurant. I think I'd make it like 2 weeks and I'd be like, I'm good. But I do like entertaining and I love
Yeah.
people. And I do think it would be very enjoyable. I certainly appreciate good service.
Yeah.
And I know like when I look to hire people, within a building company, because we have to diffuse so many difficult situations.
Absolutely.
Sometimes someone's over budget or, something bad happened, you hit bad soil, someone comes to us, at least where we are, and they're like, oh man, well, why didn't you know that? I'm like, well, I can't tell you what's underneath your house until we do a lot of tear downs. And
Yeah.
so we put an allowance in there for quote bad soil. And it's like, well, what does that even mean? And it's like, well,
Yeah.
it's organic soil. I can't build on it. Anyway, I guess people skills, to your point,
Yep.
ultimately ends up being probably the most valuable trait you have, and how you learn that.
Fast-paced troubleshooting,
Yeah.
it's problem solving, it's all relative. Because that's our world, same thing. It's fast-paced and it's problem solving. What do you do? The
Hmm.
world's moving very quick in building, and what's the angle? Yeah, and we worked at the couple restaurants I worked at were very like popular high-end restaurants, and that interaction with probably the same clientele that I'm dealing with now on the building side. They wanted a
Yeah.
service going into that restaurant, and they want a service building their home. And what's the experience? The restaurant was building an experience for them. We're building an experience to build their home. So there's a lot of relative things.
I think it just dawns on me right now, as I mentioned before earlier in the show, I just left, my client meeting where I
Yeah.
definitely didn't give them good service on the end. I basically like, hey, pay your waiter on the way out. I'm out of here. I got to go run upstairs. But I could almost, I mean, you could have a big enough company, you could justify this position. I mean, you could almost have someone who's like in charge of like client well-being or whatever you want to call this person, like the maitre d of building. Like all
Mhm.
their job would be to touch base with clients, make sure they're getting gift boxes, thoughtful things, and like just touches, and like the handwritten thank you cards that
Mhm.
ultimately, they'd probably want to see your name on it. But I feel like we have a long, or I know I have a long way to go to be doing the kind of service that I would love personally to receive. And frankly, if I was to be honest, it comes down to two things. One is time. I just don't I mean, I think every business owner says the same thing. We don't have enough time. And then
Totally agree.
second
Yeah.
is money. Cause like, I mean, I guess I could hire that person to do that, but then how do I actually justify that? Do I add a line item to every house that I build of like, let's say you build 10 homes and let's say it's,
Yeah.
$5,000. It's a $50,000 salary for customer service. Honestly, it's actually not a bad idea. It'd probably work at scale. It would probably be a
Yeah.
really good idea. But I don't know. What's your thoughts on like how would you improve your level of service to your clients if you were to make that decision today?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we talk about in our weekly meeting, like every week, is like urgency on, if it's something you don't know, respond quickly, say, we're going to get back to you. We've heard you. We got your message. We're going to be right there. So it's, I don't think there's a blanket statement that's going to fix all of it, but I think doing all, like you said, these touches, making sure that they know we got their email, we're working on it. And then we always are trying to be like proactive. So we're trying to get it to a point where the client never has to ask us what's next. They already know what's next because we told them. So if we can get to a point to there, I think that's
Yeah.
great because it means that they're never like, hey, what's my contractor doing? I think it's been a week. They're doing anything? Like they already
Right.
know what's coming because we've given them a Friday weekly roundup that says here's what's next. Next week. Here's what to expect. Here's what's going to be billed.
Do you do that via email or through co-construct, or what's your form of
Co-construct,
delivery on that?
yeah, PM
Co-construct. Yeah.
does a
Yeah.
weekly roundup, just what was happening last week, what are we looking forward to next week, just keeps us ahead of the game as far as them knowing what it is. I think that's the worst thing that happened in the past is like, client emails or emails the group like, hey, just checking in to see what's going on. Like, that's the worst email. Like, we should be telling you what's going on.
Right. No,
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah,
Well, we're that went really fast. I think we could do two more of these for a mini
yeah.
series in California, Minnesota differences. I didn't even I wanted to talk to you a little bit about green energy and tech, and I know you're building your own current home, but we'll have to save that for another episode. I guess I'll
Come out
just
and do
end
a
it with
tour
this.
when we're finished.
Ooh, I like that. I used to have family in San Diego. I used to go out and play Coronado Beach. We used to go out and play volleyball tournaments back when I was in high school and college. So I've spent a lot
Nice.
of time in San Diego. I couldn't tell you where anything is other than Coronado Beach, but I get the appeal. It's 75 and sunny. You don't even need a weatherman. He just says the same thing 365 days a year.
Yeah, there's
Um,
always a joke like, "What's the easiest job in the world?" It's the San Diego weatherman.
Yeah. Well, it turns out you're the most expensive place in the world to live, or Minnesota, the United States to live, so I can't go there. I'll just stay at your house. What,
Yeah.
I guess, one parting question, just 'cause I like how many businesses you generate. How do you like to self-educate? I mean, what are some ways that you kind of stay sharp and keep your mind, tooled up?
Uh, Podcasts actually are a good one,
Yep.
especially in the building world. I mean, I listen to you, I listen to AFT, Modern Craftsman sometimes. I kind of float around them. I get, on kicks and I start listening to them a bunch. I read the standard like Fine Home Building. I actually like a lot of design books. So I have like Jake Arnold and Amber Interiors and Jeffrey Dungan and just, a handful of architects and designers that I respect. And, I think as a builder, I can look at a finished image and be like, wow, look at the complexity that went into that.
Sure.
And that's educational for me. It's not just like, oh, it's a pretty picture. Like, whoa, look at the levels
I
of things that
it's
had to go into
it's
play there.
it's It's funny you say that because I think you're right. As a builder, you know kind of how the sausage was made, and you might see this amazing photo, and it doesn't mean we're not wowed because it's like there's the beauty aspect of it. Like
Yeah.
I'll be like, "Wowza!" But if you really stop and you're like, "Wait a minute." If I really was to think about like how was that stone arch detail? Like I was looking on your website a couple days ago as I was preparing for our speech or our interview, and some of the ceiling details that you get into, Dagan, are incredibly detailed. I
Yeah.
don't
We
even
had a
know
lot
what
of
you
those.
call what is that when you've got four arches from four different sides? Is there a technical name for that? We
Griot
don't
arches.
Griot. Yeah, we don't. I've never seen
Yeah.
that in Minnesota. Not that we don't have it. I'm sure on some architect expect it. Now all the architects are
Yeah.
probably like, well, "You don't know what a Griot arch is?" Well, I've never built one, but I'm sorry. But they're. I mean, I was just thinking about like, wow, that's you got to be a spot on. Would most of those be plaster work, or would those be
No,
like
it's drywall.
how
So it's just framed and then it's
wow,
just drywalled. Yeah.
wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. So it's all
Well,
mud.
all
Yeah.
right. Well,
We don't do a lot of lath and plaster inside.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, if someone's looking to build a new home with you, they better get in touch with you now because you're 2 years out, and not because of you, but because of the California Building Code.
Yep.
Where can our listeners find you?
Easiest is Instagram is probably the easiest. It's at Dagan Design. The website is dagandesignconstruction.com. And then for all the other, we have DDC Landscape, which is our landscape company. We have a Instagram there. It's at DDC Landscape. And then the furniture import is DDC and Co. And same as for both the websites. But we have links through the construction side. There's links to all the different companies, so you can kind of
Yeah.
navigate pretty easily.
Well, for those listening, check it out. It's a really sharp website. I thought it was very well done. How, out of curiosity, how long, how fresh is your website? It seems very fresh.
So we actually just did a refresh because
Yeah.
we had like 4 projects that we hadn't uploaded. Um, so it's been, I think we did that a few months ago, but the original templates from a couple years ago. But
Okay.
yeah, we
Yeah, it
we
looks
did a
very
sort of
sharp.
a major upfresh. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
Oh, hey, when you come on vacation up to Minnesota in January when it's really nice and warm up here, we'll take you out. But thanks for your time, and thanks for listening to the Curious Builder podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, man.
All right, see you, Dagan.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Curious Builder podcast. If you like what you listen to, please give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It really means a lot. It's a great way for us to just understand what you like about the podcast and what we can keep doing. So like and review, and please share with your friends and family. Find out more at curiousbuilderpodcast.com.